Honda is in major talks about joining NASCAR, and Row Motorsports has formed a technical alliance with Team Penske. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got some NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. The first story we're going to talk about is the King's Hat. It was unveiled at Daytona, the King's Hat. Obviously, this is a King's Hat, which is Richard Petty's hat, which, of course, this is the 75th year of Petty Enterprises and Richard Petty and the Petty family being part of NASCAR. This is really cool to see. This is a really awesome memento, and I think it's pretty awesome to see that the King's Hat has been revealed. I think it looks really excellent and looks really awesome. I can't wait to see it throughout 2024. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Superior Essex. As it was announced yesterday that Superior Essex will sponsor Noah Gragson in 2024. They're going to sponsor him in the paint scheme at Richmond. They'll be associate sponsors throughout the 2024 season. I think it's really exciting to see that Noah Gragson has another sponsor. We know the Black Rifle Coffee, True Timber, and a couple other companies are working with them throughout 2024. And now Noah Gragson will be sponsored by Superior Essex for multiple races throughout the 2024 season. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Raising Cane's. As it was announced last night that Raising Cane's is launching a new national marketing campaign around Tony Breidinger that is meant to emphasize the speed of the QSR. This is really exciting news. Obviously, Tony Breidinger has a lot of partnerships and sponsorships with her. She's one of the most followed accounts in NASCAR's industry, and she also has a lot of big branding with other major companies. I think it's really awesome to see that Raising Cane's is going to be up in their partnership and sponsorship with Tony Breidinger going forward. I think it's great to see that Raising Cane's continues to work, and this is really their biggest investment in the sport in a really long time. Pretty awesome and great stuff overall. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Happy Hour. As it was announced last night during the NASCAR dual races that Kevin Harvick has officially a new podcast that's going to be starting on February 20th. He'll be joined by Caitlin Vincey and Mama Smith, who will be his co-host through the podcast. This is really exciting to see because, let's be for real, I think a lot of us have been wanting to see Kevin Harvick have a podcast, and the fact that he is actually going to have a podcast, I think is really great to see. So I'm going to be tuning in for sure. I can't wait to hear what Kevin Harvick has to say about things going on in the industry, among other things. So this is really exciting stuff. And like I said, I'm very happy to see that Kevin Harvick officially has a new podcast. I'm definitely 100% going to be tuning in to this podcast for sure. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're going to talk about the ARCA Race for Daytona. Now, it was reported by Chris Knight from CashFence.com that in the event of inclement weather, the ARCA Race will be moved to 9 a.m. Eastern on Monday. Obviously, one of the major things to keep an eye out for during this weekend is there could be some weather tomorrow and Sunday. There is a chance and possibility that also if the Daytona 500 does get rained out, it will probably move to the evening of Monday, meaning that we might end up having a triple header if the Xfinity Series race also ends up getting postponed and moved as well. It's unfortunate there is a chance of weather's coming into play because there's a lot of hype around this ARCA race. They've got Marco Andretti, Shane Van Gisbergen running this event, which Marco was actually the fastest car on the racetrack in practice yesterday. So I really hope they are able to get the races in on Saturday, but it doesn't seem like it's very likely. So I wouldn't be surprised or shocked if the ARCA race does move, which I think there is a good chance that it is going to get moved to 9 a.m. on Monday. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Hendrick Motorsports. As yesterday, Hendrick Motorsports announced some 40th anniversary plans they're going to have. Obviously, this year is the 40th anniversary of Hendrick Motorsports and some of the big things that they are going to be doing. One, Jeff Gordon and Jeff Bodine are going to be the Grand Marshals at Martinsville Speedway. Jeff Bodine, of course, was able to get the first win for Hendrick Motorsports back in 1984, and Jeff Gordon, the winningest driver and the vice chairman of Hendrick Motorsports. They are going to have 40th anniversary schemes for the event as well. Martinsville, they're going to all have Ruby schemes. So, of course, all four drivers, that being Kyle Larson, Chase Elliott, Alex Bowman, and William Byron, will all have Ruby schemes. And there also is a 40th anniversary Camaro that's going to be sold to only 40 customers. I think this this obviously is a massive year for Hendrick Motorsports. Like I mentioned, they're all going to be having their 40th anniversary as an organization. I think it's cool they're doing all these really great things for the 40th anniversary of the organization, the most successful organization in NASCAR Cup Series history and in NASCAR history as well. I think it's really good that they're doing this, and nonetheless, I'm very happy to see that they are going to be doing all this really, really awesome and great stuff for the event. I really am glad about this, and it looks really exciting that they're doing this, in my opinion. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Larson. Now, Kyle Larson was being interviewed by Bob Podcast during media days, and he went on to praise Jade Avedissian. And he says he's really excited to see her progress throughout the ranks. Jade Avedissian has a lot of hype currently at the moment, and to see someone like Kyle Larson praise Jade Avedissian, I think is really phenomenal to see. She is a very, very talented race car driver. I think she just won the most recent Extreme Outlaw Championship last year, and she is going to be competing in multiple different ranks. I think she has been rumored to run some other series like USAC, and she's been winning a lot of races, especially as of recently. So I'm really excited to see what she's going to do working with, Kyle Larson, and seeing that Larson is excited about the progress that she might be able to carry. I think is phenomenal and absolutely incredible. So I'm really happy to see that Kyle Larson is praising Jade Avedissian because there's a lot of hype around her, and there's a lot of justified hype around her at this current moment. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Joe Gibbs. Now, Joe Gibbs is speaking to the media about the change of the leadership and adding new leadership to Joe Gibbs Racing. Obviously, over the last year, Joe Gibbs has made a lot of additions to JGR, and the Harris Blitzer Group has been joining up with Joe Gibbs. Joe Gibbs, now owner of the Washington Commanders, and has also spoken about the transition because Joe Gibbs, let's be honest and for real, he is not going to be around much longer as an owner. Joe Gibbs is in his 80s now, and a lot of times, a lot of these owners decide to retire by this point. And obviously, Heather Gibbs, who is Ty Gibbs' mother, is eventually going to take an ownership stake in the organization in a role there, and then she'll probably take over as a leader, and the Harris Blitzer Group is going to help her with that transition as time progresses and goes on. So nonetheless, I'm really glad to see that they've got some plans in the cards when it comes to Joe Gibbs Racing, and it's interesting to talk about all the leadership changes they have made as of recently. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Max Reeves. As it was announced a couple days ago on Wednesday that Max Reeves has signed a development deal with Joe Gibbs Racing. Max Reeves is only 14 years old, and he basically, I believe, is a son of the owner of Cookout. But Max Reeves has won a lot of go-kart races throughout his career. I think it was reported that he's won like 300 go-kart races and like 24, 25 championships at the young age of 14 years old. He'll likely be racing in ARCA in the next couple of years. I think he turns 15 this year. So he'll be racing in ARCA more than likely in the not-so-distant future. I think it's exciting to see, though, another young talent coming into play in the Toyota stable. And I think he'll also be joining up with TRD in the not-so-distant future. This is a big pickup. We'll be watching to see how he ends up doing. And nonetheless, I'm very excited to see that Max Reeves has signed a development deal with Joe Gibbs Racing. I really hope he can be able to make the most of it with that organization. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Akon Orata. As it was announced yesterday that Akon Orata will drive for Joey Gase Motorsports in 4 races in 2024. He'll race at Martinsville, then he'll race at Charlotte in May, then he'll race at Daytona, and finally he'll race at Las Vegas at the end of the season. Akon Orata has made quite a few starts in the NASCAR Xfinity Series and the Truck Series as well, and while his performances have not been absolutely amazing, he has been running quite a few races and also has won some Hickory championships as well, and has been winning a lot of races at Hickory Motor Speedway. So I think Akon Orata, I don't think he's going to do absolutely amazing. We know that Frankie Muniz is going to be driving in select races with this team throughout the year as well. I think it's really cool to see that Akon Orata is getting a chance and an opportunity to race with this organization, and I really hope he can make the best out of it with this team in the few races he runs. They're in a decent position, owners' points. We'll see how he ends up doing in 2024. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Bradley Wilson Racing. As was reported by Colby Albans from ARCA Park that Bradley Wilson Racing will be debuting in trucks in late 2024. From the image that surfaced, it looks like they're going to be using the number 51 car, and apparently they have an old KBM truck that they are going to be using. Bradley Wilson, I think, has been a Moon car, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not entirely sure. This is a driver I've never really heard of before, but it is cool to see that a new truck series organization is going to show up at the end of the year and the season. I really hope that Bradley can make the most of the opportunities that he has, and hopefully that this organization can run really, really well this year. I'm not really expecting him to set the world on fire in 2024, but I think the ultimate goal is to make it and run in 2025 on a full-time basis. We'll see how they end up doing. Hopefully, though, they can run really, really well and have a great season in 2024 in the races they're able to run. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Ryan Blaney. As it was announced yesterday or Wednesday that Ryan Blaney has partnered up with Range Leather. Range Leather is one of the biggest leather companies out in the United States, and obviously Ryan Blaney has, and a lot of drivers have been signing partnerships. We talked about this yesterday that Kyle Larson had signed with Prime, and now we know that Ryan Blaney is partnering up with a new company called Range Leather. They're one of the biggest leather companies in the United States. I think it's really exciting and cool to see that Ryan Blaney does have a new partnership with a company like Range Leather. We'll see if that Range Leather luck can come into play, and maybe Ryan Blaney can have an opportunity to compete for wins. Obviously, we'll talk about him later in this episode because he was not very happy after the duels, but it's pretty cool to see that Ryan Blaney has been able to partner up with Range Leather. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Norm Benning. As it was reported by Brock Beard that Norm Benning will be running a Henderson Motorsports truck at Talladega later this year. Now, it needs to be noted, according to Brock, that it'll be his own organization, that being Norm Benning's, but they're going to be getting a Henderson Motorsports prepared truck. This apparently might have been the opportunity that Norm was looking toward doing, was having Henderson Motorsports truck. There were rumors that he was going to drive for Tricon Garage, but obviously that fell through. We know that Tony Breidinger was the one who was going to take that seat for Daytona later this evening. I'm excited to see Norm Benning get the chance and opportunity to drive a Henderson Motorsports truck, especially with how fast Henderson Motorsports has been in the past. I really hope he can make the best of it and run really, really well with Henderson Motorsports and working with them. It's a great opportunity, and I'm excited to see him get the chance and opportunity to work with them this season. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Young's Motorsports. As it was reported by Joseph Strigley on Wednesday that Young's Motorsports has acquired the owner's points of the 07 SS Greenlight Racing team. This means that Young's Motorsports number 42 car, which of course is moving out to the NASCAR Xfinity Series this year, this means that they will be locked into the event because they are 36 in the points. And obviously with the chance that Daytona Xfinity qualifying might end up getting rained out due to the weather it's coming into play, this would mean that this car would be able to make the show. This is a new organization, Xfinity. They've been around the truck series for many, many years, but they're putting a lot of their focus on the Xfinity Series this season. I hope that they can run really well throughout 2024, but I am glad to see that they have the owner's points ready to go, and hopefully they have a good season this upcoming year. We'll see how they end up doing. We'll see how competitive they end up being this season, but nonetheless, glad to see that they at least have some owner's points, and they're at least going to be able to race in 2024. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Dick Berggren. As it was reported by Steven Taranto that Dick Berggren was at Daytona International Speedway. Dick Berggren, who is arguably one of the greatest pit reporters in the history of NASCAR and is obviously one of the biggest motorsports media people in the industry still to this day, obviously part of the MPA Hall of Fame. Dick Berggren was a legend on pit road and always got the best stories, but was never crazy about telling you. He always went straight to the point and was amazing at doing it. And to see that he was at Daytona International Speedway, I think was phenomenal to see. So I hope that Dick Berggren at some point can get back to working with Fox Sports or another company, because I think a lot of people miss seeing him doing broadcasting especially. He was amazing doing it. I know Dick Berggren is a lot older now, but still I would love to see him because it's been nearly a decade and a half since he last was broadcasting. So I really hope at some point we do get to see Dick Berggren do some work once again with a media company. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Daytona 500 qualifying. As it was reported by Adam Stern last night that FS1 got 821,000 viewers for Daytona 500 qualifying. That is up 3% from 2023, which of course has 795,000 viewers. It is really good to see that obviously this qualifying was on Wednesday, which of course a lot of people don't really tune into TV on Wednesdays. To see that this qualifying sessions continue on a year-by-year basis to go up, I think it went up about 30,000 in 2023 from 2022, and now it goes up about another 25 to 26,000 from 2023. And that's probably a lot of younger fans who are also tuning in to Daytona 500 qualifying as well. Also, Jimmy Johnson running the event does help as well. So nonetheless, it's really good to see Daytona 500 qualifying is up this year again. I really hope that all the races are up. Obviously, with the weather being an issue for this weekend, it may not end up being the case. But I am glad to see the Daytona 500 qualifying and the ratings were up at least quite a bit for the event. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Takuma Sato. As it was announced yesterday afternoon that Takuma Sato will drive a 75 for Rahal Letterman Lanigan Racing in the 2024 Indianapolis 500. There have been some talk and chatter that Takuma Sato had been talking to multiple organizations about running the Indy 500. Last year, I believe Takuma Sato had driven for Chip Ganassi Racing and ran decently, but not absolutely amazing. This is a team, though, that he has won with before in the Indianapolis 500. He was able to go out and win in 2020 and have one of the better cars in the field. I think Takuma Sato's chances are really, really high. Obviously, Rahal, Letterman, Lanigan, they did struggle to make the field last year. And obviously, Graham Rahal had initially been bumped from making the Indianapolis 500. But I do believe that Takuma Sato has a really great chance and a really strong opportunity to be able to make the field this time around. He's going to be in great equipment, and I think he does have a very strong chance. And I am confident to say that I think Takuma Sato will not only make the Indy 500 this year, but I do believe that Takuma Sato will have a good chance and opportunity. If he's still up front in contention, I think he'll have a really great chance and opportunity of contending for the win in the Indianapolis 500. And again, I'm very happy nonetheless to see that Takuma Sato will be racing in the Indy 500 this season. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Chris Hacker. Now, unfortunately, Chris Hacker, it was announced yesterday that Chris Hacker was sadly involved in a wreck when he was on his way to Daytona International Speedway. Now, according to report, it is expected that Chris Hacker suffered some pretty serious injuries, but he is expected to make a recovery. This is really, really good news to hear that at least he's expected to make a recovery. I'm wishing him the best of luck in this situation. Obviously, it was announced a couple days ago that some situations that come up, but I really, really hope that he can recover from this, and hopefully he'll be able to get back behind the wheel of a race car in the future. Again, it's expected will recover in the next couple weeks. I'm really glad to hear that, at least from that perspective, and wishing Chris Hacker the best of luck. I want to send my thoughts and prayers and out to the family of Chris Hacker, and I'm wishing that family the best of luck currently at the moment. I hope things go well for him going forward. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Chase Elliott. As Chase Elliott was on Sirius and NASCAR radio not too long ago, and he says that he is not blaming Alan Gustafson for what happened in 2023. And he's putting a lot of blame on himself. And this is really good for Chase Elliott to at least take some accountability because let's be honest and for real, Chase Elliott did not have a good year in 2023. Chase Elliott missed quite a few races, I think 6 or 7 races as a matter of fact. And when he came back, he didn't do absolutely awful by any stretch of imagination, but Chase Elliott did not do absolutely amazing either. So I'm glad to see that Chase Elliott is taking at least some accountability for the lack of performance last year. I just think that there were a lot of things that were wrong. Alan Gustafson is not the reason Chase Elliott missed the postseason like a lot of people thought he was. I think a lot of accountability goes on the fact that, one, Chase Elliott missed a ton of races, and had Chase Elliott ran the whole entire season, with the speed he had, he was going to make the postseason. So I'm glad, like I said, that Chase Elliott is taking accountability for his actions there. But at the same token, same time, they could have set up better cars. But I don't put the full blame, again, I don't really put the full blame on Alan Gustafson for that. I put more of the blame on Chase Elliott for missing a ton of races because he didn't have to miss those races, and then he got suspended for intentionally wrecking Denny Hamlin. So again, I don't put the blame on Alan Gustafson one bit for them not making it. I saw so many people calling for Alan Gustafson's job throughout the year when Chase is like saying, no, it's not Alan's fault that I missed the playoffs, guys. It really wasn't my fault. So like I said, I'm very happy and glad to see that Chase Elliott is at least taking some accountability for that, and I think it's a good thing that he is taking account, not Jimmy Johnson, Chase Elliott is taking accountability for how the year ended in 2023. And I hope that Chase Elliott can have a bounce back in a recovery season in 2024. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Bubba Wallace. Bubba Wallace was asked by Bob Pockrass about how he felt after the clash and was asked if there's any beef between him and Kyle Larson, even his teammates, after the clash. And Bubba Wallace said, no, there is no beef from what happened at the clash. He basically explained the situation. He said he got in the back of Kyle Larson, which got in the back of Ty Gibbs. Then I got in the back of Kyle Larson again. And then Kyle Larson got back to me. And really, he's not mad at Kyle Larson for that. He knew that he did it and he deserved what he got. Again, I think that even Kyle Larson knows that he wouldn't have done that to Bubba Wallace had Bubba Wallace not gotten into the back of him. And at least it shows that, one, Bubba is not holding any grudges and beef. And I think you look at Bubba Wallace, and I think he's just excited for 2024 overall. And I think he's ready to get into the 2024 season. But I was really intrigued to see if Bubba was going to be mad about it. And again, I'm glad to see there's really no tension and beef between Bubba Wallace and Kyle Larson. Those two have had a history in the past. You go back to 2022 when Bubba Wallace and Kyle Larson got into it at Las Vegas. Larson unfortunately forced Bubba Wallace up the racetrack and the Bubba then right-reared Kyle Larson down the straightaway after the week, of course, announced that Kurt Busch was not going to be racing in 2023 on a full-time basis. So again, I'm glad to see that there's really no tension and issues between Bubba Wallace and Kyle Larson there. I was intrigued to see if there was going to be, but at least in this time, there isn't no tension, and I'm really happy to hear that because, in my opinion, I don't think Bubba Wallace has a right to be mad at Kyle Larson because Bubba Wallace was the one who started it, and that Kyle Larson was the one who finished that situation. And I think that Kyle Larson really wasn't at fault for that. And again, I'm just glad to see there's no beef and tension between both of them. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Denny Hamlin. Now, Denny Hamlin during Media Days was speaking to a ton of the media, and he says that he likes the playoff format, but wishes a championship was decided in 3 races. And we'll get into that in a second, but obviously how the championship format works is that basically the final 4 drivers go up against each other in one race. I entirely agree with Denny Hamlin that it should be 3 races instead of 1 race, where you have a final 4. One, I think it would be a much more fair system, and basically having a 1-race championship to decide who is going to be your champion, I just don't think overall is a really, really good move for the legitimacy of the sport. I'm not saying that Ryan Blaney in the system that would have been that Denny Hamlin had wouldn't have won the championship, because if we did the 3-race system for the final 4, Ryan Blaney would have been the champion because Ryan Blaney finished in the top 2 in all 3 races. So Ryan Blaney would have still won the championship in that format. But I think a lot of people would love the playoff system a lot more if it was like that, instead of it was the other way around. To me, I think it should go the other way around where the playoff system is like that. And I think it should be like that to where the playoff system is 3 races instead of 1 race. I think it would be a better system, and I think a lot of people would like the playoff format a lot more. I do like how it rewards points, and I think it would be a much more fair system. And honestly, we should just reduce the amount of cars that are in the playoffs too, from 16 cars to 12 cars, because there is some filler cars that are in there that probably should not be in there, in my opinion. I really wish they would reduce the amount of cars that are in there, because I think there are too many cars in the playoffs currently at this particular moment, and I think there should be a reduction of the cars currently in the playoffs as well. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Joey Logano and Ty Gibbs. Now, there's been a lot of tension between these two at the start of the 2024 season. And Bob Pockrass had asked both of them if they've talked to each other after the incident at the clash. And Joey Logano said no, and Ty Gibbs also said no. Well, Ty Gibbs basically interjected and said that basically I got out what I wanted to say, and we both got out what he wanted to say at the clash. And then obviously Joey Logano called out Ty Gibbs on SiriusXM NASCAR radio, saying they had a really good conversation at the end of the last year. And then Joey Logano basically said his words don't mean anything, and there's no point in talking to him. Obviously, Joey Logano and Ty Gibbs, I want this rivalry to continue throughout the year, because I think this is going to be a really fun rivalry to watch between both Joey Logano and Ty Gibbs, because both those drivers are kind of similar when it comes to their aggression. They both have won races now, well, not a cup race for Ty, but both of them have won races in all 3 series. Ty Gibbs was contending for the win at the Clash, and then obviously Joey Logano also had a chance to win the Clash, and Joey Logano is also starting on the pole for the Daytona 500 this year, so he's got a lot of excitement for this Sunday or whenever the Daytona 500 does in fact end up happening. I really hope this beef continues. Obviously, I don't really expect much to come out of it this week, but I think we're going to see these two get into each other quite a bit, and I think at some point by the end of the year, we might see a fight and a brawl end up taking place between both of these guys. So, like I said, I really hope this continues between Joey Logano and Ty Gibbs. I want to see it happen, and I want to see both of them get into a fight and a squabble for this event, because honestly, I think it'd be really, really fun to watch these two get into a fight and a confrontation between each other once again. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the media rights deal. Now, it was reported by Adam Stern yesterday that Steve Phelps says NASCAR could have gotten 15% more for its TV deal if the media market hadn't changed in late 2022. Obviously, back in 2022, the media market was a lot more open, but in late 2022, the media market became a lot more tight-lipped and a lot more tighter when it comes to what they were going to be doing when it comes to the market. That's why I think it took so long for the TV deal to get done and why a lot of the moves happened for the current TV deal that we're going to be having starting in 2025. Every single year will be $1.1 billion. If they increase that by 15%, I think it meant about $1.25 billion every single year, which would have been a lot more money for the teams. But still, $1.1 billion is still quite a bit of money, and they are still satisfied with the money that they are going to be getting for this TV deal. Of course, we'll be on Fox, we'll be on NBC, but we're also going to be on True TV, TNT, and also we're going to be on Amazon starting in 2025. These teams are expected to get a lot more money, but there is still a lot of talk about the charter agreement and whether or not they are getting enough money or not, and frustration is still building. There's still negotiations going on about that, and a lot of these teams are wanting to know how much money they exactly are going to be getting because they're not getting the exact numbers of what exactly they know at this current moment in point. But at the same token, in same time, at least is money going to be coming in when it comes to this media rights deal. Or at least there's some positivity when it comes to the fact that there is more money coming in, which I think is like a 40% increase on a year-by-year basis. The previous deal, which we're in right now at $840 million, now we're going to be getting up to $1.1 billion for a 7-year deal. And I would expect that maybe gets negotiated to where more races could be on the main broadcast going forward into the future. But the media rights deal is officially set, and I think that there's at least a little bit of satisfaction in some instances, but I think they definitely would have loved to see it increase just a little bit more, to be honest with you. And now we're going ahead to move on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about AJ Allmendinger. Now, during media days on Wednesday, AJ Allmendinger reported to the media, and he says he would have preferred to stay in Cup full-time in 2024 with Kaulig Racing. But he says he's going to do whatever he can to help Chris Rice and Matt Kaulig over there at Kaulig Racing. AJ Allmendinger is going to be running part-time in the Cup Series with Kaulig Racing this season. Of course, we're running in the Daytona 500 on Sunday, and we don't know the rest of the schedule for AJ Allmendinger, but he's probably going to run some road course races and probably some short tracks and super speedways throughout the 2024 season, with his schedule still not officially confirmed. We also do know the fact that Josh Williams is going to run Atlanta Motor Speedway next weekend, and we also know that Shane Van Gisbergen is going to run 7 races with Kaulig Racing in 2024 in the Cup Series. We also had heard some rumors potentially that Matt DiBenedetto also could make some select starts with Kaulig Racing this season, but nothing is officially confirmed at this point, but there has been some talk and chatter in regards to that. Look, I think AJ would have preferred to stay in Cup, and why? I don't blame him. AJ Allmendinger absolutely was doing really solid last year. He basically won a race at the Charlotte Roval and was getting better as the year progressed. And I feel like with him not being full-time in the Cup Series this year, yes, he's going to be part-time, but the fact he's not going to be full-time this season, I think it is going to leave some struggles for Kaulig Racing in 2024. They're not going to be as strong, in my opinion, this year as they have been in previous seasons. I do expect that there's going to be some struggles coming along the way. I'm glad that AJ is going to be contending in Xfinity, though, because AJ Allmendinger is going to be one of the favorites, and in my opinion, he might be the favorite to win the championship in Xfinity. He's my pick for the championship going into the year. I've got him winning like 5 or 6 races. He's going to win a ton of races this year, and honestly, whatever the Xfinity Series race at Daytona happens, whether it's Monday or Sunday, I think he's got a really good chance of contending for the win this weekend, and I think he'll be a threat throughout 2024. It sucks he's not full-time Cup racing this year, but I bet you he'll love being Xfinity, and I think he'll have a fun time this season. So we'll see how he ends up doing through 2024, but I bet he wishes he still was in the Cup Series full-time this year. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about BJ McLeod. Now, BJ McLeod was being interviewed during media days before Daytona 500 qualifying and Daytona 500 racing happened, and he says without a charter, it's difficult to sell sponsors. Obviously, Live Fast Motorsports is no longer a full-time organization of the NASCAR Cup Series, as Live Fast Motorsports is a part-time team. Because remember, BJ McLeod and Live Fast Motorsports sold their charter off to Spire Motorsports in Trackhouse Racing for this season. Zane Smith is, of course, going to be driving the number 71 car for Spire Motorsports this respective season, and eventually probably will be incorporated into the Trackhouse Racing family. It is a shame to see that BJ is saying this. It is hard to sell sponsors, especially when you're not guaranteed to run the Daytona 500, and unfortunately for BJ, he did not make the Daytona 500 this year, even though I think he really wanted to make the Daytona 500 this season. We know that BJ McLeod has worked really, really hard, and last night he put on a hell of a performance, and he put up a hell of a fight to try to make the Daytona 500 this season. I really hope that BJ gets more opportunities to run some, because of course he's going to be running the Xfinity Series race later this weekend as well. And I really hope that BJ can get to run a lot more races in Cup. And basically he doesn't have to worry about all the sponsorship woes and worry about taking care of the car and whatnot. He can just go out there and be free because he does have a lot of money now. And I think that money is going to be put to good use trying to help their equipment get a lot faster throughout the season. I really hope that they can run more races this year, which again, they're going to run a part-time schedule in the Cup Series this year from my understanding. It's interesting to hear this though, and I really hope BJ McLeod can have a strong season with Live Fast Motorsports and the select races they run. I would also expect potentially though that they are going to have more drivers getting behind the wheel of the seat throughout the 2024 season, not just in their Cup Series program, but also in the Xfinity Series program for BJ McLeod Motorsports as well, as I think the 78 car is going to be full-time this respective season. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Ryan Blaney. As Ryan Blaney was not happy after the race yesterday at the Daytona Duels. Coming to about 15 or 10 laps to go in the dual race last night in duel number 2, the field had basically been caught up together and they were racing really, really hard. Ryan Blaney and Ryan Blaney were battling each other. Beren tries to go up and basically put a little bit of block on Kyle Busch. Ryan Blaney also tries to put up a little bit of block. Brad Keselowski gets a huge shove to Kyle Busch coming down the straightaway, and then Kyle Busch really has nowhere to go. And then a big one starts piling up, and Ryan Blaney hits the outside wall very, very hard. After the wreck, Ryan Blaney, like I said, was very pissed off and not very happy after hitting the outside wall extremely hard, which is one of the hardest hits I've seen in a very long time at Daytona International Speedway. He went on and spoke to the media, and he said that he's pissed after the wreck. He's tired of getting involved in these wrecks. This is now the third time that I've been wrecked at Daytona International Speedway, and I'm getting sick of it. And not to mention, Ryan Blaney has been involved in a lot of hard wrecks in the last year. Remember back in Nashville, his car kind of got stuck in throttle, if I'm not mistaken, and he hit the inside wall in an area where there is no safer barrier at, which of course they are building a safer barrier, which I think is finally a good decision that they are doing that for that area of Nashville. But Blaney was mad about that, and then he got wrecked at Daytona after Christopher Bell gave a really bad push to Ty Gibbs. He hit the outside wall really, really hard, that being Ryan Blaney, and he said at least the cars are safer, but man, that's another hit. And then after bad pushing and all that kind of stuff, he was not very happy about that. And again, when you've been wrecked 3 times as hard as he's been wrecked in the last 8 or 9 months, I don't blame the guy for being upset and frustrated. It's either feast or famine, it seems like, for Ryan Blaney at the super speedways, because he's one of the best super speedway racers, but he also, of course, was basically someone who's been caught up in a lot of incidents as well. And then Kyle Busch was interviewed, and he also was not very happy. He was mad that the field was just saving fuel throughout the event, and also kind of said that I had nowhere to go in the situation. You hold out your stuff back, as Kyle wanted to go and race up front and try to lead the duels, because I feel like he had a fast enough car to go out there and contend. And Kyle Busch also, like I said, just looked very unhappy after the incident as well. To me, I don't really know who put blame on for the wreck. I think it was just multiple drivers in making mistakes out there. Beren made a mistake. Basically, Keselowski made a bunch of mistakes there, giving a push and shove. Keselowski also was trying to lift in that situation, though, to be fair. So I don't think think there's one driver that's completely at fault for the incident. I think there's multiple drivers that are at fault for the wrecking situation. But again, I think Ryan Blaney was justifiably upset and frustrated because I don't think Ryan Blaney really did anything wrong in that situation. He just had nowhere to go, unfortunately got wrecked, and multiple other drivers got caught up in a wreck in a dual qualifying race, which was exciting last night, I will say, but it was still very chaotic and very crazy, especially in the second duel. But like I said, I completely understand Ryan Blaney being frustrated and upset about the wreck and the situation. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Martin Truex Jr. Now, during media days on Wednesday, Martin Truex Jr. was asked a lot of questions surrounding retirement for 2024 and whether he's going to retire at the end of the season or not. Well, Martin Truex Jr. would respond to the media, and he hasn't made up his mind yet on 2025 if he is in fact going to retire or not. He said his decision probably will not come till late this year in 2024. This has been a question that's been coming up for the last few years, really since about 2021 or 2022. We've had a lot of questions surrounding Martin Truex Jr. on whether or not he is going to retire from the Cup Series or not. I think there is a chance at the end of the year that Martin Truex Jr. does end up retiring from the sport. But again, we're probably not going to know until the end of the year and the season. But how likely do I think he retires at the end of the year? I think there's a couple things will depend on. One, his performance. If Martin Truex Jr. performs extremely great this year, I think there is a chance that he does end up staying in the sport for another season in 2025. But if Martin Truex Jr. struggles for most of the year and basically runs as bad as he did at the end of 2023, I think there is a very strong likelihood and possibility that Martin Truex Jr. could retire at the end of the season. But if he does in fact end up retiring at the end of 2024, who would be his replacement? Well, I think this is what is going to happen. I think that John Hunter Nemechek will move over from Legacy Motor Club and take over the number 19 or the 18 car if they decide to renumber it. I think that John Hunter's in line to eventually go back to Joe Gibbs Racing in the Cup Series. I think he's on loan with Legacy Motor Club potentially. So I think that John Hunter Nemechek will get moved from Legacy Motor Club and move over to Joe Gibbs Racing in 2025. And then I think either Corey Heim or Chandler Smith will take the 42 car. That is, if, of course, Martin Truex Jr. does end up retiring. I think it's 50-50 right now, to be honest, and I think it is a question that we'll be asking throughout the 2024 season. This is a question that's probably going to get asked probably every week or probably every month or so on whether or not Martin Truex Jr. is going to stay in the sport or whether or not he is going to retire. He was one of the big drivers to watch for throughout the silly season up to this point. I think there's much of a chance that Martin Truex Jr. does make a return, as big of a chance also that he does in fact end up retiring. I think he has a chance of retiring, but we'll end up with seeing what happens in regards to that when it comes to Martin Truex Jr. or whether or not he'll retire from the sport. We'll have to keep an eye on this story as time progresses and also as time goes on when it comes to Martin Truex Jr. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Harrison Burton. Now, Harrison Burton was interviewed by the media, and Chris Knight from CashFence.com put out a really good article in regards to Harrison Burton, where Harrison Burton says that 2024 is a big year for him, and it's basically a do-or-die year for him going into 2024. This is going to be Harrison Burton's third year in the NASCAR Cup Series, driving the number 21 car, and a lot of people really feel like that Harrison Burton probably should not have been behind the wheel of the 21 car in the first place this season, considering that Harrison Burton did not really show a lot of improvement last year and struggled. Yes, he got a top 10 at Darlington and did get a couple top 10s throughout the year, but for the most part, Harrison Burton did not have a really good year. Now, he is going to be working with Jeremy Bullins in 2024, which will really help him. But this is a big year for Harrison Burton. If he does not step up and have a much better year or show at least some major improvement this year in 2024, I feel like the Harrison Burton's future in the NASCAR Cup Series could be very uncertain. I'm not saying that Harrison Burton is going to be out of the sport completely, but this is, like I said, is year number 3. This, in my opinion, is a massive break year for him, and this is basically a big year to really step up to the plate, especially when you have a lot of forward young hotshots that are on their way to potentially make some starts in Cup. You've got drivers like Todd Gillen who could move from Row Motorsports over to that 21 car. You've got other drivers in the Ford camp like Riley Hurst and Cole Custer that are waiting in the wings who are looking to make some starts. You've got Haley Deegan, who is also in the running to maybe make some Cup starts. Well, I'm not saying she is or not, but she could make some Cup starts this year at some point with how high Ford is on her. Harrison Burton needs to have a big year because if he doesn't step up to the plate, he will probably lose his ride. I know that Harrison Burton has good connections. His dad knows the Wood brothers really, really well, and he has raced with the Wood brothers the last couple of years, that being, of course, Harrison. But, man, he just got to step up to the plate. He got rushed up to the Cup Series way too quickly and probably should not have been in the Cup Series as quick as he was. He needs to have a better year. I think he finishes in the top 25 in the standings. I think there is a chance Harrison Burton will be back behind the wheel of that seat. But honestly, if he doesn't step up to the plate, there's a really great chance and possibility that Harrison Burton will not be back in the Cup Series in 2025. Again, having a sponsorship funding will help his chances of staying behind the wheel of the 21 car, but in all honesty, in all seriousness, that 21 car might be coveted. Even though it has struggled, I think it's more of the driver than anybody else, because remember, Matt DiBenedetto contended for playoff spots in 2 of those seasons and made the playoffs in 2020. So Harrison Burton needs to have a much better season and needs a show of improvement if he is going to stay behind the wheel of that seat in 2025. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Daniel Suarez. Now, Daniel Suarez is being interviewed by the media during media days, and he says he is not feeling pressure in 2024, and he's ready to get this season started as he feels as excited as he did all the way back in 2021 in the first year of Trackhouse Racing. Daniel Suarez will have a new crew chief this year in 2024 with Matt Swiderski. But Daniel Suarez, in my opinion, is the biggest name on the hot seat going into this year. Because Daniel Suarez, that 99 ride is extremely coveted right now at this moment. And yes, Daniel Suarez, you are absolutely correct in the comments by saying that he does have a contract through the 2025 season. But remember, contracts can be easily broken. And if Daniel Suarez does not have a great year in 2024, he may end up losing his seat. He obviously did not make the main show for the Clash, so that definitely is going to hurt his chances of keeping the seat. And why do I mention this? Well, you look at Trackhouse. They have 4 drivers under contract right now that are going to be in the Cup Series at some point this year, and they only have 2 charters. Now, obviously, I think Trackhouse is going to do whatever they can to try to get all 4 charters for their team so all 4 drivers can drive. But I think that Trackhouse, if Daniel Suarez does not have a great year this year, they're going to have to make some really difficult decisions. Because you've got Zane Smith, who's driving the 71 car for Spire with a Trackhouse alliance. We know that Justin Marks has said publicly that he's going to do whatever he can to make sure that Zane Smith is a full-time driver with them next season. And if Zane Smith performs extremely well and let's say makes the postseason, that might, even if Suarez has a better year, that might kick Daniel Suarez out of that respective seat. So he might get removed regardless. And then you've got Shane Van Gisbergen. There's a lot of hype around Shane Van Gisbergen going into this year and this season. And a lot of people are expecting that Shane Van Gisbergen is going to get up to speed very, very quickly and win some races in Xfinity. If Shane Van Gisbergen wins like 5 races this year, I don't think that's going to happen. But let's say SVG wins like 5 or 6 races, he's going to get promoted to the Cup Series pretty quickly and pretty instantly. So I think it's going to be a big year for Daniel Suarez. He needs to contend for a playoff spot. He doesn't have to win a race, and I don't think he has to make the postseason this year, but he needs to be in position in an arm's reach and has to have overall a really, really good season if he's going to want to keep his seat at Trackhouse Racing next year. I think, like I said, there's a good chance he will stay with Trackhouse Racing in 2024, but it's a big story to watch. 25, I should say, but it's a big story to watch. He does bring sponsorship funding, which is going to help him, but at the same token, same time, sponsorship can only take you so far, and if you don't really have a good year, you may end up losing your seat. So we'll see how he ends up doing in 2024, and we'll see if Daniel Suarez keeps his ride after this year, because I think he's on the hot seat more than any other driver going into the 2024 season. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the first of 2 major stories in today's episode as we're talking about Front Row Motorsports. As it was announced yesterday that Front Row Motorsports has formed a technical alliance with Team Penske. And they also have become a Tier 1 for-performance organization for this year, meaning they're going to have a really tight alliance with Team Penske in the 2024 season. They're going to get data, they're going to get resources, and they're going to get everything a Tier 1 organization gets in the Ford Group. This is really exciting news. You think about Front Row Motorsports. Just about 5 or 10 years ago, this organization was struggling to make races back all the way in 2011, and they failed to qualify for races all the way back in the early 2010s. Now they're an organization in the last few years that has won a Daytona 500, has won a couple races with multiple different drivers like David Reagan and, of course, them. They have also won with Michael McDowell a couple times, including in the 2023 Indy road course race, and they've been making some huge moves. And we've already seen some of the effects of Row Motorsports becoming a Tier 1 organization, considering the fact they're going to be starting on the front row in the Daytona 500, and they were very fast in the Daytona duels. And it's really exciting for an organization like Row Motorsports, who in my opinion has deserved this chance and opportunity. They've been hiring a lot of big name people recently. They've obviously had some Joe Gibbs Racing people come over to that organization, like Clayton Hughes recently had joined as a spotter. No, he's no longer spotting for them. And they've also had some engineers come over there. They had Blake Harris for a while, who was at Joe Gibbs Racing. He now is working with Alex Bowman. And they now are working on getting a third car as well part-time that Kaz Gralla is driving, and other drivers could drive as well throughout this season. There's just a lot of excitement in the air for Row Motorsports right now. And I think in the next few years, and really in my opinion, in the next 10 to 15 years, I think this team is going to win a championship. And I had thought maybe they were going to fall off a little bit this year. I honestly think that they have a really great chance to at least get one of their cars in the playoffs in 2024. Most likely being Michael McDowell. And especially with Team Penske assistance, they're going to be very, very good this year. And we now transition away from front row, and they probably have replaced an organization in the Tier 1 group, that being Stewart-Haas Racing. Look, Stewart-Haas Racing, there's a lot of talk about this organization and team. We know that they tried to hire Michael McDowell in the last year. They tried to hire Zane Smith, who was at front row as well. They've tried to hire a lot of different drivers to get in their team. Even I think Matt DiMenedetto was rumored at one point that they tried to hire. But Stewart-Haas Racing, there's been a lot of chatter rumors that SHR could even leave Ford at the end of this year and this season. And they were basically, there's a lot of talk that they could leave. They haven't signed their Ford contract, and the fact that Front Row has signed their Ford contract before Stewart-Haas Racing signed their Ford extension really tells me all I need to know. I think that there's a really good chance that they leave Ford at this point, especially now with the fact that Front Row is coming into play and they're showing even a lot more success. I'm worried that SHR is going to become the fourth best Ford organization, because RFK, they've gotten their stuff together, and even Penske, I think, is going to be really strong this year as well. They've had a great year in IMSA already. They've won a lot of big races in motorsports. SHR really hasn't won much recently. They had a winless year last year. So I think there's a very strong chance that Stewart-Haas Racing is going to be in the dumps, and they're going to potentially leave Ford. They still haven't worked on that Ford contract. They could go back to Chevy. There's also been rumors from people saying that Junior Motorsports is going to be involved. I don't know how true those rumors are, but people keep saying that Junior Motorsports is going to get involved in a big way with a team like SHR and by partnership, even though Dale Jr., I don't think, wants to spend $40 million on a charter currently at the moment. And even said on his podcast that he doesn't know how the charter market is looking at this current point. But going back to Row Motorsports, I'm just excited to see how this team is going to perform. I think they're going to grow as an organization long term, and I just think there's a lot of excitement if you are a massive and a huge fan of Row Motorsports on what they're doing currently at the moment. And I think that this organization and team is going to be a really exciting organization to watch for many, many years to come. I'm excited for the future, and I can't wait to see what Front Row is going to do over the course of the next few years, as they have signed a massive technical alliance with an organization like Penske, who's one of the best Ford organizations in history. We'll see how Front Row ends up doing this year. I think they're going to be really strong and confident, and I think they'll be very, very fast as time progresses and goes on, going into the foreseeable future. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the final major story of today's episode, as we're talking about Honda. Now, we kind of talked about Honda on the channel yesterday, but it was reported by Adam Stern on Wednesday evening during Daytona 500 qualifying that Honda remains in talks about the possibility of joining NASCAR, per source. As Steve O'Donnell says, negotiations at a fourth OEM are heating up between NASCAR and Honda. This has been a really big talking point in rumor over the course of the last few months. Obviously, we kind of got reports that Honda has been in talking and conversations that if they don't get the hybrid situation figured out over at IndyCar, there is a really strong chance and possibility that Honda may end up leaving IndyCar overall altogether. Now, obviously, they could go over to work on the Formula One program because Aston Martin is going to be switching over to Honda starting in 2026, going away from the Mercedes plant. But Honda has also said recently that they could also join NASCAR. Now, there's been a lot of talk about Honda joining NASCAR over the last few seasons and years. They came very close to joining in the last couple of years, but obviously those talks fell through. Now, the last time we had a new manufacturer in NASCAR join was when Toyota joined the Truck Series back in 2004 and then eventually joined the Cup Series in 2007. So it's been a very long time. We were very close to getting Dodge back in the sport. There was a lot of really heavy talks back last year that Dodge was going to try to get back into the sport, but unfortunately those talks fell through. The RFK had been getting really close signing a deal with them. It sounded like they were having heavy talks with RFK Racing, even Suarez Racing as well, but unfortunately those talks sadly fell through and it did not end up happening. Honda coming to sport would absolutely be huge. Because obviously there's a lot of talk about if a new manufacturer would come in, one of the key things would add more charters to the field. I would expect an increase of about 4 or 5 charters if that would end up taking place. We still don't have a charter agreement done, but I think more charters would get added income to the place as well. And again, another manufacturer means more competition as well. Because I think Honda would do whatever they can to be extremely competitive and be very, very fast if that was to be the case. So there's some talk about that. What teams could join Honda if they were to come to NASCAR? The first organization I think about is Spire Motorsports. Spire Motorsports, why do I talk about them? Well, Spire Motorsports, they've obviously made a ton of moves over the course of the last couple years and seasons. And Spire Motorsports has another big partner, Gamebridge. Gamebridge's owner is Downtowners, who is a co-owner of Andretti. Andretti Global is one of the biggest organizations in IndyCar, and they have a massive partnership in IndyCar with Honda, which they've had for about, I think, the last decade or so. And Andretti's been getting involved in NASCAR in a big way. And we know that Andretti, Michael Andretti being that, is very interested in getting in NASCAR, and his son Marco is racing in ARCA in Chevy currently at the moment. I think Spire Motorsports would be the most likely organization to make the move over there if it ends up happening. The other big organization is Suarez Racing. Suarez Racing, I already talked about this, but I think there's a very strong chance that they're not going to be a Tier 1 group if they re-sign with Ford. Ford is obviously, I think, frustrated with the lack of performance. Even Tony Stewart has been frustrated with the lack of performance from Suarez Racing, especially as of late. So I think that they would be another organization that could move over and start over with Honda. I know that Tony Stewart was frustrated with Toyota, and I think he wanted to stay with Chevy long term because, of course, they're not an American manufacturer, it seems like. But at the same token, same time, I think Tony Stewart now is more of a businessman than anything else. And if you want to start off fresh, especially with wanting to get the team a lot better, they would potentially be a team that could switch over to Honda. And then another organization that could come to NASCAR, come back to NASCAR, is Chip Ganassi Racing. Chip Ganassi Racing has not been in NASCAR since 2021 when they sold their charters off the Trackhouse Racing back in the 2021 season. And obviously, of course, Chip Ganassi stated back in April 2023 that he is still interested in racing in NASCAR. So I could absolutely see a team like Chip Ganassi Racing make an official return and maybe start up at a team with drivers like Matt Benedetto, perhaps, or someone young and talented. Maybe they get Carl Edwards out of retirement and start up their organization. That would be pretty cool if that ended up happening. But I think it'd be cool to see Chip Ganassi Racing come back into the sport. It'd be very interesting if they were one of those organizations that made the jump. So talking about Honda in a big way, when could they join? Well, I think the earliest they would join is 2026. And I think there is a chance if they do join, it'll be announced sometime this year. Because if they're going to join, they're not only going to have a car for the Cup Series, but they're going to have a Cup car for the secondary series. We don't know if even Xfinity's going to be back past next year. And they're going to have a car for the truck series as well if they're going to join, which they have a truck. I think the Honda Pilot is what it's called, if I'm not mistaken, is a truck that they would end up using. And they also do have the other Hondas, like the Honda Odyssey, which would be the car they probably would end up using for the Cup Series if they were able to join. It is exciting to hear, though, that Honda is in major talks and conversations about joining the sport, because having a manufacturer like Honda potentially join NASCAR, I think would be absolutely huge and major for the sport, especially in growth. It would grow the sport. A lot of fans would come in, and a lot of fans who are fans of Honda having new manufacturer competition, I think would absolutely be huge. So yes, I think Honda will join the sport. I think they'll have a really good chance of making their jump into the sport. in the not-so-distant future, and I think at some point this year, it is going to get announced that Honda is going to be joining NASCAR. So, that is going to be today's NASCAR news and motorsports news video. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, notifications on, so if I win a video, it does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support my Patreon as well. Links go below that, and comment your thoughts below on today's episode. Do you think Honda is going to join NASCAR? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And what are your thoughts about Row Motorsports signing an alliance with Team Penske? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Got a lot of content dropping over the next couple days. Tonight we'll have the Truck Series race review from Daytona. Tomorrow, pending the weather, we'll have the Xfinity Series race review from Daytona and the Daytona 500 starting lineup dropping. And then on Sunday, if the weather holds up, we'll have the Daytona 500 race review. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode, and I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.